The champagne flutes were already raised when Zara walked through the doors. She had spent 2 hours getting ready. New dress. Hair pinned just the way Minjun liked it. Heart full of 3 years of waiting, of believing, of telling herself that patience was a form of love. The restaurant was breathtaking. Candlelight. White orchids. A string quartet playing something she didn't recognize but felt deeply. She smiled to herself, thinking, this is it. This is finally it. Then she saw the banner. Congratulations Minjun and Sujin. The smile died before it could finish forming. She stood there, frozen in the entrance, 100 eyes slowly turning toward her. The music didn't stop. The champagne didn't lower. But the air changed, that horrible, charged silence of a room that knows something you don't yet want to know. Minjun saw her first. He didn't panic. That was the part that broke her. He didn't look guilty or ashamed. He walked toward her with the calm confidence of a man who had already made his peace with what he was about to do. Zara. His voice was even. Controlled. I didn't think you'd come. You invited me. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I know. He paused. I thought it would be easier to tell you in person. She looked past him. At the woman standing by the head table, tall, draped in silk the color of cream, with the kind of effortless poise that only comes from a lifetime of having everything. Han Soo-jin. Daughter of the Han Group. Korea's second largest conglomerate. Zara had heard the name in business news. Never imagined she'd hear it like this. 3 years, Minjun. I know. 3 years. When you had nothing. When your company was collapsing and you had no one, I was there. I gave up my job in London. I stayed. He looked at her then, and for a single moment she thought she saw it, a flicker of something real, something that remembered who they were before all of this. But it passed quickly. Replaced by something colder. Love is a luxury, he said quietly. Success comes first. The string quartet kept playing. Someone laughed at another table, completely unaware. And then Sujin appeared at his side, slipping her hand through his arm with practiced elegance, her eyes moving over Zara the way you look at furniture that doesn't match the room. Some people, she said softly, a faint smile on her lips, are simply meant to watch from the outside. Zara didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of them. She turned around, walked through those beautiful doors, and made it exactly 14 steps down the corridor before her legs stopped cooperating. She pressed her back against the wall and let the silence of that hallway hold her while everything she thought her life was, quietly fell apart. I gave him my heart when he had nothing. The moment he found money, he decided I was worth nothing. The months that followed were not easy. But Zara was not the kind of woman who stayed broken. She quit the job she had taken to stay close to him. Moved into a smaller apartment, hers, fully hers. Started freelancing in interior design, something she had abandoned for a relationship that turned out not to deserve the sacrifice. She ate alone sometimes. Cried in the shower sometimes. But she got up every single morning and chose herself, deliberately, like a discipline. She wasn't trying to become someone better to make him regret it. She was trying to become someone better because she finally realized she deserved that. It was during this season of quiet rebuilding that the evening happened, the one that changed everything. The rain came suddenly. The kind that appears without warning and soaks you before you can make a decision about it. Zara was walking back from a client meeting, no umbrella, cutting through the older quarter of the city near the riverside markets, when she saw the man. He was older. Well-dressed, not flashily, but with the quiet precision of someone who had long stopped needing to impress anyone. He was on the ground, back against a building wall, one hand pressed to his chest, face pale in a way that made her stomach drop immediately. She didn't hesitate. She was beside him before she'd finished thinking, one hand on his arm, the other already on her phone. Sir. Can you hear me? I'm calling for help right now, stay with me. His eyes opened. dark, sharp, even through obvious pain. "I'm fine," he said, with the instinct of a man unaccustomed to needing anything from anyone. "You're not fine. Please don't argue with me right now." He almost smiled at that. The ambulance arrived within minutes. She rode with him, answered the paramedics' questions since he was in no state to, waited in the hospital corridor for over an hour until she was told he was stable. When the doctor came to find her, expecting family, he seemed confused that it was just a young woman in a damp coat who had no idea who the patient was and simply hadn't wanted to leave. When she finally slipped into the room to check on him before leaving, he was sitting up, more color in his face, watching the door as if he'd been waiting for her. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "I know," she replied. "I hope you feel better." She turned to go. "Your name," he said. Not a demand. Something quieter than that. She looked back. "Zara." He nodded slowly. His eyes held something she couldn't quite name. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if he had just found something he hadn't known he was searching for. "I'm Sung-ho," he said simply. She smiled, wished him well, and walked out into the wet night. She did not know yet that nothing in her life would ever be the same. The connection deepens, the truth surfaces, and the moment that shocks everyone arrives. They kept crossing paths in ways that felt almost unreasonable. First at a gallery opening she attended for a client. Then at a quiet restaurant she liked for its corner booths and lack of pretense. Then, somehow, at the same early morning market where she bought fresh flowers for her apartment every week. Each time, Sung-ho was understated. No entourage. No visible machinery of wealth. He came alone, moved quietly, and noticed things, the way people rarely do when they're used to being the most important person in every room. They began talking. First briefly. Then longer. Then in the way that happens between people who have both learned, through different kinds of loss, how to finally be honest. He asked about her work. Not politely, genuinely. He wanted to understand why she cared about spaces, what she believed a room could do for a person who was struggling. "A room can tell you who you're allowed to be," she told him once, over coffee that had long gone cold. "When everything around you is beautiful and intentional, you start believing you deserve that. That you're worth the care." He was quiet for a long moment after that. "I haven't thought about deserving anything in a long time," he said finally. There was something in the way he said it, not self-pity, not performance, just a man who had been so long surrounded by people measuring him in billions that he had quietly stopped expecting to be seen as anything else. With Zara, he remembered how she was unaware of who he was for months. He never corrected the impression. Not out of manipulation, out of something rarer. He wanted, just for a little longer, to be simply Sung-ho. The man. Not the institution. When she found out, it wasn't gradual. It was a magazine, face up on her client's desk, a headline about the annual ranking of Korea's most powerful business figures. His photograph looked back at her. Kong Sung-ho. Chairman. Kong Industries. Net worth in figures that made the number lose meaning. She stared at it for a long time. That evening, she met him as planned. She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table, and said, "You could have told me." "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" He met her eyes without deflection. "Because the moment you knew, you would have started treating me differently. Everyone does. I needed to know if there was something real here before that happened." He paused. Was I wrong? She looked at him, this man who had listened to her for months without agenda, who had never once made her feel small, who asked about her dreams with the kind of attention that made her feel like they mattered, and understood, despite herself, that nothing had actually changed. She already knew him. The money was just a fact. "No," she said quietly. "You weren't wrong." It was another 3 months before he proposed. He did it without theater. No restaurant full of witnesses. No banner. Just the two of them on the balcony of his home in Suwon, the city laid out below them, a small box he held like it might break. Everyone who has ever been close to me wanted something, he said. Position. Access. A share of something I built. You wanted nothing. And because of that, you gave me the only thing I've needed for years. He paused. You made me feel like a person again. She thought about what it meant to say yes. The age gap was real, 22 years. The public attention would be inevitable. The scrutiny would be relentless. She knew what people would assume, what headlines would say, what whispers would follow her into every room, but she also knew what she felt. And she had already learned, at great cost, what it looked like to stay in something that looked right from the outside while being hollow at the center. This was not hollow. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. The wedding was small by design. A private hall. 60 guests. No media. Zara wore something simple and devastating, and looked more herself than she ever had dressed in anything expensive. The ceremony was quiet and true. Sung-ho held her hands and said his vows in a voice that did not waver. She cried. He looked like a man who had just been allowed to exhale after years of holding his breath. Everything was perfect. Until the reception doors opened. Min-jun walked in with the untouchable confidence of someone who had never once imagined the world might arrange itself against him. He had been invited, not by the couple, but through a family notification he had apparently assumed was a formality. Some cousin's gathering, he'd thought. Something minor. He straightened his jacket as he entered. Glanced around with the mild boredom of a man attending an obligation. Then he saw the bride. Zara. Standing at the head of the room, her hand resting in the arm of the groom, laughing at something a guest had said, radiant in a way that he had never, he realized with sudden violence, ever made her feel. He stopped walking. Someone behind him said excuse me, but he couldn't move. Then the groom turned. And Min-jun's world simply stopped. His father's face looked back at him. Sung-ho, calm, warm, unhurried, met his son's eyes across the room. He said nothing immediately. He simply nodded, the way men do when they've anticipated a moment and have decided to meet it with dignity. Then he spoke. Min-jun. His voice carried easily across the suddenly quiet space between them. Come greet your stepmother. The room held its breath. Min-jun could not speak. Could not move. Could not locate, in any part of himself, the appropriate response to what he was looking at, because what he was looking at was every choice he had ever made, gathered into a single image, looking back at him. The reckoning, the collapse, and the ending that will stay with you. The months that followed that night rearranged Min-jun's understanding of himself in ways he hadn't thought himself capable of feeling. He watched from a distance, because there was no other position available to him, as the life he had dismissed assembled itself into something extraordinary without him. Zara moved through the Kong world not like someone trying to prove a point, but like someone who had simply decided to show up fully and let that be enough. She remembered the name of every assistant she met. She sat with department heads who expected to be managed from above and instead found themselves being asked real questions by someone who actually listened to the answers. She launched a charitable design initiative that renovated community centers in overlooked parts of Suwon, and she did it without announcement, without positioning it for press, without any of the performance that usually surrounds wealth doing good. People didn't admire her because of who she married. They admired her because of who she was. And Min-jun, sitting in board meetings where her name now occasionally appeared in the same breath as his father's legacy, felt something he couldn't name at first. It arrived slowly, like weather. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It wasn't grief exactly. It was the particular ache of someone who has made an irreversible calculation and must now live inside its result. He went to his father one afternoon. Walked into Sung-ho's office without an appointment, which said everything about the state he was in. She's using you, he said. Standing. Arms rigid. She saw an opportunity and she took it. You were vulnerable after. Sit down, Min-jun. I'm serious. She came from nowhere. You don't know what she. I said sit down. The authority in his father's voice was not raised. That was the thing about Sung-ho, he had never needed volume. Minjun sat. Sung-ho looked at his son for a long time before he spoke. She refused a reward when she helped me on the street. She didn't know who I was for months. She tried to walk away when she found out because she was worried about what people would think of her motives. I had to convince her that what we had was real. He paused. Tell me which part of that sounds like someone using me. Minjun said nothing. You're not angry because she used me, Sung-ho said quietly. You're angry because she never used me. Because she simply stopped choosing you. And you have realized, too late, what that means. The silence in that office lasted a long time. Minjun left without another word. The unraveling of everything else came quickly. Han Soo-jin had never been subtle, only careful, and carefulness has a shelf life. The investigation began through a financial irregularity filed by a mid-level compliance officer who didn't know who she was and therefore wasn't afraid of her. What unraveled from that thread was methodical and damning, manipulated acquisition bids, competitors misled through fabricated due diligence reports, a systematic campaign to position herself for access to the Khan Group's assets through Minjun. She had never loved him. She had loved the door he could open. When the story broke, she disappeared from his life with the clean efficiency of someone who had always maintained an exit. No explanation. No confrontation. Just absence, and the very public wreckage of everything they had built together. Minjun lost the partnership he'd secured through her family's connections. His board position became untenable. The social world that had welcomed him when he arrived with her on his arm quietly closed its doors. He had traded Zara, a real person who had loved a real version of him, for a transaction that didn't even have the decency to complete itself. He understood now what his father had built over decades, not just wealth, but a reputation for seeing clearly. And what he himself had done was mistake the appearance of power for the thing itself. The gala in Suwon was one of those events that draws the city's best into a single room and calls it charity. Grand in the way that only events with good causes and significant budgets manage. Zara and Sung-ho arrived together. She wore deep emerald, her hair loose, her posture the kind that comes not from training but from a woman who has stopped apologizing for the space she occupies. Sung-ho walked beside her with the quiet pride of a man who knows exactly how fortunate he is. Minjun was there. An ordinary attendee. No camera sought his face. No one leaned in when he passed. He stood at the edge of the room and watched his father and Zara work it with the natural ease of two people who are genuinely happy, and therefore genuinely interesting to be around. He found her near the end of the evening. She was alone for a moment, standing near the tall windows overlooking the city. He approached. He had rehearsed nothing, which meant when he opened his mouth, only the truth came out. If I could go back, he said, voice lower than he intended, I would choose you. Zara looked at him. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Those would have required her to still care enough about him to perform an emotion. What she gave him was quieter and more devastating than either. Peace. The tragedy isn't that you lost me, she said. It's that you only saw my value once someone else did. She didn't wait for a response. She turned, moved back through the crowd, and returned to her husband, who looked up as she approached with the uncomplicated joy of a man who never takes for granted the fact that she came back. A journalist caught up with her near the exit. Recorder out. The predictable question. Any regrets about the journey that brought you here? Zara glanced at Sung-ho. At the man who had been a stranger in the rain. Who had listened? Who had waited? Who had asked her to build something real with him and meant it? The worst day of my life led me to the greatest love of my life, she said. Sung-ho took her hand. They walked through the doors together. Behind them, the lights of Suwon stretched on, and Minjun stood still in the middle of a room full of people, finally understanding the price of everything he had chosen. He traded love for money. And lost both. If this story stayed with you, you already know someone who needs to hear it. Share it. And if you want more stories that actually make you feel something, subscribe. We'll be here.